And so we began down the long road of trying to appeal these sort of revoking of our ability to see the VSD data. And what we eventually found out was, and CDC didn't even send us this letter, that they had sent out a letter making these accusations. And we finally got a hold of it, and so we were actually finally able to make a response. I mean, initially we just got a letter from Kaiser saying, you've been accused of these things by CDC, we suspend you. We didn't even know what the specific document from CDC was.
And they're implying that we could breach patient confidentiality. First of all, there's no names, addresses, phone numbers, or any identifying material. Secondly, I missed something in this. I was playing tennis in Florida, and I was asked by Congress to investigate them. If the names, addresses, and phone numbers were there, as they often are in my practice and in my other databases that I use, where do they come off implying that I would want to steal them? First of all, what would I do with them? Secondly, I'm the investigatee, not the I'm the investigator, not the investigatee. How dare they imply that those crooks are worried that I'm a crook? When did I become a crook? I was asked to go look. And besides which, you couldn't Tell. And we told the Geisers and showed them that there is no names, addresses. By the way, the Geisers didn't know that. They had supplied the CDC with full names and addresses. They didn't know that they had been stripped out for a public database. So, of course, they started giving us permission to go back in again.
It took us from about February, when the letter came, through about, I'd say, September, October, to finally get reapproved by several different HMOs that had suspended our access, so we could look at their data in the VSD again. And by that time, the National Immunization Program, who had been in charge of allowing external researchers to look at the data, had already had that power stripped away.
They were been fired, and we need to tell you about that because it's totally involved with this. After the 2004 IOM, at which they tried to embarrass us and which numerous scientists on our side presented from major universities that there were problems, the 2004 IOM, as people are probably aware, concluded that there was no possible link between thimerosal and neurodevelopmental disorders and autism, and not only that, no further research should be done. Never heard a scientific recommendation like that. And we've seen lots of internal documents that they decided this long before they ever had the hearings, and we also know that it was paid for by the CDC, and there's all kinds of illegal things going on about it. And in fact, Dr. Weldon opened the meeting by telling that we know this meeting's phony, we know what you're going to do, and we're going to tell you before, and that's all on the record. But even that, forget about that. It turns out that there was another IOM that was held that summer, and that IOM was to
This
look
is
into,
in the summer of 2005. I mean 2004, sorry.
This was to look into problems with data access, and I think they thought they were going to get the IOM to say that people like us shouldn't be looking at the VSD database, and that intermediate studies like the ones we had found from Verstappen were not fair game. Their memos don't mean anything. Nobody should look at people's internal memos. But that's not what happened. They came out with this report in February of 2005, and it's entitled Vaccine Safety Research, Data Access, and Public Trust. And this IOM report basically says that the data that was analyzed by the 2004 report, and obviously they chose to only believe the government's data and not the other data, but this report says the government's data was manipulated, that they withheld data, that they did things inappropriately, they changed their criteria inappropriately, and it recommended that there be two outside panels be set up. One is to assure that outside researchers can get to see all the data they want, and the other one was to see that when they do their own internal studies, they do them fairly and that they don't change their criteria and all that kind of stuff. So this one totally trumps the other one. And one day after this came out, exactly one day, this came out on a Thursday in February, one day after that, there was a meeting to which Julie Gabbarding was invited. She's the head of CDC. And at that meeting, the entire vaccine immunization program was fired. And I mean fired. They may try to put a spin on it and say reorganized. But the head of that program, Dr. Robert Chen, no longer is a chief, and he no longer works on childhood vaccines. And beyond that, the National Immunization Program of the CDC that had been in charge of vaccine safety for over 30 years is no longer any authority on vaccine safety at all. So when they run around telling you to take the vaccine, they still have authority for vaccine uptake. But everybody needs to stop them and say, by the way, you're not in charge of safety anymore, are you? Because they were completely fired from that. And Julie Gabbarding said her own office, she would supervise the safety. And no disrespect, but I don't think she's able to supervise the safety, but that's beside the point. These people were absolutely fired, and that leaves the status as follows. If you looked at the 2004 IOM, all studies presented on the side that said that, that they don't think there's a connection have now been discredited. Not only was the Verstappen study discredited, or at least made suspect by this manipulation charge, but it turns out that the Elizabeth Miller study in England was totally controlled, paid for, influenced. We have all the memos. In fact, at one point they said what we said, which was that England shouldn't study it because they didn't have enough thimerosal, and that the database was no good. In fact, we have a memo from Elizabeth Miller saying, does that mean they have to give back the money? But they went ahead and did the study anyway. The Swedish and Denmark studies, you might say, look independent, but the people on the Swedish and Denmark studies worked, several of them worked for national immunization programs. They didn't identify themselves as such, but if you search their names, you'll see they work for the national immunization program.
They work for the CDC.
So therefore, there are no studies that have not been discredited on the other side. Well, and now all the remaining studies are on our side, and it's fairly obvious. Earth to people who are listening to this, the CDC themselves fired them for manipulating the data. So to those, my colleagues, my beloved colleagues at American Academy of Pediatrics and the local health departments who are relying on the government studies, I can understand why you might possibly rely on government studies over private studies. But you're now relying on government studies that have been discredited, and the people who did them have been fired. It's now time to back off and say, we were fooled too. We love them dearly. They were fooled. Don't support people that have been fired, and don't support studies that have been determined to be discredited.
But unfortunately for our VSD experience, even with all of this amazing restructuring going on, we still have not been able to see the full VSD database because there are lingering effects of what the National Immunization Program did.
Let me talk about the biggest one. The biggest one is there's two halves to the vaccine safety Datalink, up until the end of the year 2000 and beyond the end of 2000. And it's crucial that we look at the data beyond the year 2000 because that's the data where they've started to withdraw thimerosal. There's still thimerosal in some vaccines, but they have taken it out of some. And the question is it going down? Is the rate of autism and neurodevelopmental disorders going down? We've already seen it going down in the public database, VAERS. We've also seen a change in the rate of new cases in the California data. We already suspect that it's going down in the VSD because that monitor told me that she's studying it and that she hinted that it was already going down. But what did they do to make sure that we couldn't get to that? Since Congress was ordering the VSD from the government and they had to sort of supply it, although you see they dragged their feet, what they did is they let a contract. They paid, and this is not an exaggeration, $195 million to a private company whose job was to keep the VSD, and if they show it to anybody, they lose the $195 million. So the people are fired, but this company doesn't want to show it to us because they like the money. In addition, initially, at least so far, they have denied they even know anything about it. But we have, of course, government contracts are public. We have the government contract that says they have $195 million. It says they have it, says they supply it to CDC on demand.